Hey there, it's Sam. Let's talk about CSS Layout. There are three main CSS layout systems used in today's web pages. The Flow layout system, the Grid layout system, and finally, the Flex layout system. Before we continue, let's ask ourselves a question. What is actually a layout system? The browser is not a magic. Every element that is rendered in the browser has to somehow be placed in the DOM by some sort of system. And that system is known as the layout system. By default, all the elements are using the flow system. The flow is very simple. It simply says that elements should be laid out in sequential order. For example, let's say we have a few headings here, hey yo, hey ya, and hey you. Based on the flow system, these headings will be rendered in sequential order. So we'll expect hey yo, hey ya, and then hey you. Simple as that. Now let's move on to the grid layout system. The grid arranges elements in a 2D layout in the form of rows and columns. So here is how it works. Each row is divided into 12 even grids. A row can have columns inside it, and each column can be assigned to up to 12 grids. So we can specify how many grids that each column would take. So on the first row here, I only have one column, and that column is taking up the whole 12 grids. On the second row, I have 3 equal columns, and each column takes 4 grids. That's the reason on why they're having the same width. On the third row, however, we have 3 columns with different sizes, and you can customize it in any way you like. We can even nest a row inside a column. Pause a video for a second and see if you can figure out the structure shown here. Alright, first of all, we have a row, and this row has 2 columns. Each column is taking up 6 grids. Next, the column on the right has 2 rows nested in it. The first row has 3 columns, and the second row has 2 columns. This second diagram down here will help you to visualize the grid allocated in the structure. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's cool, but how can I apply grid into my website design? And here it is. This is a layout that I built using grid. See if you can figure out the grid structure of this. Don't worry too much about how to do it yet. We'll learn more about this in the next lesson. Okay, let's move on to the Flex layout system. In contrast to grid, Flex is a one-dimensional layout system. Elements are regarded as boxes and arranged in a single direction. If there's no space left, they'll simply continue on the next line, and so on. We'll go through Flex in details in a future video, but for now, all you need to know is Flex is an alternative to the grid layout system. It can do pretty much anything that the grid can. Now here's a question. How do we change the default layout system to grid? To do that, we need to set the display property of an element to grid. But it's not that simple. We also need to tweak the corresponding grid CSS properties to make it work just like how we wanted it to be. Although the concept is simple, but doing this manually is not as straightforward as you think. So I would suggest you to use a CSS framework like Bootstrap to construct a website, which is what we'll be learning in the next lesson. But if you like a challenge, you're more than welcome to learn the CSS grid property to use it on your next website. Alright, using Flex is very similar to using grid. All we need to do is to set the display property to Flex, and also tweak the Flex property to fit your use cases. As you may have already noticed, Flex properties are less intimidating than grid, and it's easier to learn. Why do we want to use grid and Flex instead of the normal flow layout system? Well, there are 2 primary reasons. First, it's easier to arrange DOM elements by using grid and Flex. As you have seen in the previous example, it's very easy to create beautiful layout by using Flex and grid. The second reason is grid and Flex makes it easy to create responsive web pages. That means content created by using grid and Flex look good in both mobile and desktop. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the block and inline block element. There are 2 types of HTML elements. The first one is known as a block element, where it takes up to 100% of the width. Any elements that's placed after it will move to a new line. As you may have noticed already, headings are block elements. So every time we put in headings, any elements after it will be placed on a new line. Now the second type of element, the inline block element, will only take as much width as it needs. Elements next to it will be placed right after it. For example, the span element. If we put two span elements together, they'll be placed side by side. Now, is there any way to change this default behavior? Yes, there is. The answer is, again, using the display property. So if we change the display property of a headings to inline, it is possible to put two headings side by side. In contrast, if we set the display property on a span to block, we can make the span property to occupy the whole line. Just a quick summary on the display property. There are two types of display. First is the layout display and the second one is element display. For the layout display, we can have flow, grid, and flex. Flow arrange elements in sequential order, grid in 2D, and flex in 1D. And for element display, we have block and inline block. Block will make the element to occupy 100% of the width, and inline block will place the elements side by side. That's it for this lesson, and I'll see you again shortly. If you enjoyed the content of this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell icon for more content to come. It will really help me out. Thanks for your support.